Dr. Power, the guest has arrived.
Oh, thank you, Bonnycastle. Hi, folks. Come on in. Have a seat. There's room for two over here. Well, I'm so glad you joined me today. This is the first of our Smoke Act sessions for our session. I hope you enjoy them. We'll have 8 of these, and they form the discussions that we'll have in class. Not the only things we're going to talk about, but some of the issues that we take out of the paper. And I have to take them. Today's a Wednesday prior to the course start on Monday, so we're a couple of days behind the actual, whatever the current status is of the stories we talk about. So build on them and add any other stories you'd like to talk about. The Smoke At Sessions is something that in Oxford, the Don, the prof had chambers, sort of quarters, and you did readings there. You didn't so much sit in a classroom, but you'd come down and the Don would have a small cluster like this of 6 or 7 people around, and through cigars and pipes and port and glasses of sherry, they would talk about issues like we're going to talk about today. And it's through the Socratic dialogue that we exchange ideas and challenge each other and test each other's hypotheses that we tend to get some firm terrain to stand on as through critical thinking and reflective thought, that I'm satisfied with my position. I can defend it. And in this course, that's all we ask you to do. There's no wrong or right answers. Just have some good, hard, reflective thought. And if you're satisfied that your view of the hand is the right view of the hand, then that's where I want you to stand. And it's the same on the exam. There'll be nothing I say that is the correct answer. As long as you can give me evidence-based support for your position, you've met the requirements of the course. I don't want you to be overwhelmed with the course. Those of you who had a chance to go in and do a quick scan of the vast array of materials in here, there's a lot. So go directly to the deliverables and see what you have to produce. Just that will get you your mark that you need to have a mark to go through the system. Anything else is bonus. And I had to design it that way. When Pedro came to me and said, Terry, can you take this from a face-to-face class to an online class and keep the standard, I felt quite challenged and frankly wasn't happy about it. I enjoy the face-to-face teaching and the Socratic dialogue and the interaction and the fast moving of a class environment, and it's hard to replicate that into a online situation. But having said that, not just personally me working on it, but really a collection of a wonderful bunch of people like Bonnycastle that just announced your arrival, and others work hard every week to get these discussions to edit and to help me put in the course these rich materials. And I've done it deliberately in the sense that I've had a chance to scan your backgrounds, your bios, both cohorts, and it's interesting. We have such a vast array of folks who are very skilled in strategy, do it almost on a daily basis. Terms like goals, objectives, visions, strategic inflection points, that language, that lexicon will be well known to those folks. There are others of you that I sense this will be rather new, and there'll be a bit of a ramp-up curve to get to understand some of these terms and concepts and notions. And so what I've done is said to everybody, here's the basics in the deliverables, do that, that's all that you're required to do. But for those of you that are already well down the road and becoming strategic practitioners, I put a bonus section in there. And go in there and have a look. It's not required for the exam, but you find a whole bunch of rich things in there that may help you in your day-to-day job. For example, in the second session, I guess, we give you a little red toolbox with about 40 some odd tools in there that you use throughout the program, and many in this course. But if for those in the bonus section, I put another 100 tools in there in another box. And more than you'll ever need in your lifetime. But for those interested in strategy and have a passion for it, like I have a passion for it, go in there and have a look around. But the bonus section you'll find rich with materials to look at your pleasure. But do a time appreciation. You need balance in your workplace, balance in your life. And as long as you do the deliverables, I'll be happy. Specifically on the deliverables for these discussion sites, I'd like to make the point that all I expect from you is 2 meaningful posts in a week. 2 meaningful posts in a week. That's not hi, how are you, but that's reflective thought, adding some value, some capital, intellectual capital to the class, and do that for us, and you've met the requirement. That's not to say a number, I've had it in the past, will do 30 or 40 posts in the week because they have a passion. They're enjoying the topic, they're enjoying the flow of the discussion, and I don't want to stifle that. I want you to do that. I want you to enjoy the course and get something out of it, and I'll work with you. But for those that say, look, I've got other things to do and my time is quite tight, just give me 2 meaningful posts on the discussion sites, and you've met the requirements. So that should be helpful in that regard. Critical correctness. I challenge you a little bit on this. I tend to poke the bear a little. There's no political correctness in this class, as long as we're respectful of each other. So we have Muslims in the class and we have Christians in the class, and if we can't have this clash of civilizations, if we can't have these conversations in an academic environment, in a respectful, fair and balanced way, where in the world are you going to have these discussions so you can truly understand? I mean, for example, if I held up my hand and asked you to describe what you see on this side of the hand, you'd probably say, well, an old arthritic hand of a 73-year-old with a ring on it. But if I turned it around here and asked you to describe it, I think you'd agree with me, you'd have to describe it a little bit differently. And so that's what we have to do in this class, is we have to come around from this side of the hand that we view the biases, the way we perceive the world, and come around to this side of the hand and try to stand on that terrain for a few minutes and view the world and get a sense of it. And we're going to do that a lot in this class. That's the only way to establish this critical thinking. And indeed, you may even wonder why in a strategy course are we looking at these emerging issues? And it's because we need to understand the water in the bathtub. If we don't understand the what's about to emerge through the fog and mitigate the damage or exploit the opportunities these changes are going to make in our strategy, in our businesses, and indeed in our lives, then we are not doing our job and what you're being paid for. And most of you are being paid for one thing at your work, and that's to be strategists, to help lead your company. And so we'll talk more about that as the course unfolds. I think I've covered all the points that I wanted to cover, other than say that I'm available to you. I'll work with you. I want you to have some time with your families, and I mean it sincerely. And this is not meant in my course to be a boot camp. It's meant to have some downtime on the weekends. But I accept there's a number of you working so hard during the week, you must do the work on the weekends to get through the course, and I accept that. But I'm saying to most people, I'll expect that it's Friday night. I don't expect to see you around on the weekends. I want you to spend some time with your families, to do what you have to do, but get some downtime and join me again on Monday morning. For those of you that have to work on the weekends, because you can't get it done during the week, I'll be there, I'll be available to you and working with you on the weekends and doing some posts and answering some of your questions throughout the weekends. But as many of you as can, I do underscore the importance of you getting some downtime with your family, because it's putting great stress on the family and on your children, those that have them, and I want you to spend a little time with them. I'll be available to you anytime you want to call, 250, make a note, 250-472-3836, 472-3836 in Victoria. And I've got a better office at home than I have here on the campus, and so I tend to work on these online courses from my home for the next 8 or 9 weeks. And so most of the time you'll find me at that number unless I'm in at my office here doing meetings and other work. Okay, folks, with the administrative out of the way, let's now deal with what's in the news. I want to look at local and regional and national and international. And as I said before, you can't design strategies unless you know what the water's like in the bathtub. So let's look at some of these articles, not just what's on the, as I say, on the front page, but let's peel the onion for a few minutes and try to understand some of the implications that flow from that will impact your company, your lives, your strategies. Opening page on today's news is the closing of the Sears stores. It was a national chain, started back in fact, Hillside Shopping Mall here, I see by the paper, 1969. What's that, close to 50 years ago. 110 employees all left off, and Sears is closing. It's 130 stores across Canada. And that's the story, but now the implications of that are significant to you and your business and us, and this is what we want to practice doing, is drilling down on these things, using our strategist perspective on what it all means. And clearly what here is we have these large blocks of retail space in Hillside Mall, which is a local mall, but in Victoria, but it was one of the largest outlets. And what's that space going to be used for by the retail companies that run these things? And understand those retail companies impact you too, because your pensions, in fact this one was involved with the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board, actually funded these things. And so if these things are collapsing around our ears and large tracts of space aren't being used, that's going to impact your pension. Now the Canada pension's in good position according to all reports, unlike some in America that we watch. But nevertheless, we want to keep our eye on these things, because this dramatic shift caused by the Internet of Everything, and you know what, I use the word everything rather than things, because of the transformational shift from refrigerators and stoves and toasters and things like that, things. It's now everything. It's you, it's I, it's cows, it's animals. We're all going to be looked up, sensors and interconnected as part of this new industrial age that we're heading into. And so we want to be aware of that. And then the challenge for us is, as advisors, as consultants going out there, how do you go into that mom and pop retail store that's being faced by this dramatic shift away from the retail world into the online world? How are they going to be able to compete? Are they all going to be the way of Sears and Close? Or is there a way we can think to sort of revitalize the pure retail businesses? And that's difficult. I think some of the thoughts today suggest that if we can make it some sort of an entertainment activity center, if we can somehow make it a hybrid between the online and the retail situation that you can shop from, go in, taste and touch and feel, much like the old, in fact it was Sears, the old catalog shopping centers, that you could walk in and actually touch the goods for a few minutes and then order it and it'll be sent out to you at some sort of bulk distribution channel. It's interesting, I was reading another article that Walmart expects its online sales in groceries to be up 40%. Amazon is also breaking all sorts of breaking trail, was first into that movement of doing online groceries in a mammoth way. And so Amazon right now is doing something like $140 billion from all sources on its online shopping. And Walmart's just starting with $10 billion. The question becomes for us that in this new world, there's only the quick and the dead. And the folks that come a little late to the party have a struggle. Walmart, notwithstanding its brand name and its supply chains and its lean systems, is going to have a hard time struggling to close the gap between it and Amazon because they're out of the box and on the way and very innovative. If you go to Toronto and the Amazon breaking point there, 25% of that factory is robots. Dark factories, no heat, no lights, just robots working in the dark, sorting the things out. And I've asked you to look at a video that I did a couple of years back on the Internet of Everything that talks in terms of seeing this new world, which is here now, of robots working in dark factories 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And once the capital expenditures are made, little or no cost. All that labor, all those unions and things are not an issue. And up to the back door comes the robot trucks like Mercedes are doing in testing. And again, you'll see some of that in some of the materials as we go forward. And it's taken down, say, to the Vancouver docks. And Sweden right now they've got the prototypes out of drone ships, container ships. Sweden is working on those. It will take it across the pond. And then on the other side, unloaded again by drones and robots. There's over 250,000 truck drivers in Canada. And at the speed we're going to these drone cars and drone trucks, where are they all going? Blue-collar, good-collar jobs going? This course, we're going to talk a bit about that because your businesses, your sectors, whether it be farming, banking, whatever you're in, nursing, it's all going to be impacted. So during this course, we'll be talking a bit about that and then how we craft our strategies to be proactive, to exploit the opportunity to mitigate the damage that this is about to hit. As I say, if you procrastinate, you won't be around long. So Sears is a good story, something we can look at that video. And this week we'll have a discussion online a little bit about the strategies we might come up with for retail, or are they dead? The growth of online, good or a bad thing? What are we going to do with the wages and people that are impacted by these stores closing down? If they're not retrained, those 110 people that are sales clerks, and not to diminish the role of a sales clerk, but as those jobs get fewer and fewer, if they're not retrained, there is no place for them in this new world, and they're unemployed. And that impacts you and I and our taxes and how we're going to take care of them. So lots there to discuss. Let's go to the next little story we might find in here. Renters, certainly in Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, Victoria, it is difficult for first-time homeowners and for anybody, I suppose, to buy houses these days. But the average price of a home in Victoria right now is in the area banging close to $900,000 for an average three-bedroom home. $900,000. I bought my first home back in 1965. I think it was $16,500. That wouldn't even cover the tax on it today. And it was 5 bedrooms and 2 baths, brand new. Interesting stories. And so anyway, there's a story there for us to look at, and on its face it's hard, and they go through all the combinations of saving for a down payment and why it's more difficult, et cetera, et cetera. But we need to look at that too as strategists, as business leaders. You'll be going out there. You are the directing minds for our nation with your MBA and going out there in the workforce and the age that you're at. Increasingly, if you haven't already, you're going to become the ones that set the pace. It won't be old farts like me, but it'll be people like you that are going to take this nation where it has to go. So you have to ramp up, get educated, and give some critical thinking to these sort of problems. You can't just ignore them, because you see what happens with the Arab Spring in Egypt a while back and the other nations, that if you have a whole demographic section of young people, in that case in Egypt, of 19 to 25 years old, without a future, without jobs, with nothing, then it just explodes on you. ISIS and all those things take place. There's got to be some upward mobility, some way to engage and have a sense of the pie for these people. And increasingly, young people who've been brought up with the dream, the American dream, the Canadian dream, that you can buy a home with a down payment, and over years it becomes your pension plan, that you pay it off and you're taken care of, that's disappearing. And indeed, it's also disappearing that it was a colleague of mine that I went to school with, Frank Graves, who runs ECOS, a survey system in Canada. I read one of his reports last week, I think it was, and he made the observation that, based on his survey, what was deemed to be the middle class in Canada is diminishing. It's getting smaller. And they're now calling themselves working class, where I might describe myself as middle class a few years ago. Based on my economics and how I feel about myself, I'm working class. And so there's this gap between the rich and the poor that's taking place. And that's a problem too, and it's accelerating. I mean, if you live in Toronto, if you live in Vancouver, and you walk down a certain street, you're stepping over people on the streets, the homeless people, and the numbers are growing. Seniors, there's not enough homes for seniors out there that you can put them in. Government-sponsored ones. If you have money, of course, you can find a nice senior citizen's home. They'll take care of you and live in a nice style. But the average person who didn't have those benefits, keep in mind that Canada Pension Plan only came in about the mid-60s, and so the opportunity for many of our seniors was missed. They didn't have the chance to build that sort of pension plan, and salaries in the 40s and the 50s were extremely low for your grandparents, and so their pensions are meager. And we're not building enough affordable housing for this mass of people that's on the bottom end of the economic spectrum. And it's getting worse daily, and it's something you have to deal with, something we have to talk a bit about and think of any ways around it. So it's a thought we could spend a few minutes on. This was another tragic story too. 81% of the Indigenous reserves live below the poverty line. 27 communities in Canada, their median total incomes are below $10,000 a year. And so there's the face story, but if you dig down a little bit, we have to do better. We have to reset this whole story. The OECD do a survey of the best countries in the world to live. Canada is number one. In Canada, they say Vancouver was, of the cities, the best city to live in. And frankly, those that live in Vancouver and those who have lived in Victoria would probably argue that Victoria is better than Vancouver. My point is, we live in a very fine city. In this very fine city, as I drive from Royal Roads into the city of Victoria, along the shoreline, the finest waterfront in the world, the Esquimalt Band, the Songhees Band, live right on the waterfront going into the harbor in downtown Victoria. It's the finest waterfront. But for some reason, there's like a clear line in the road, it stops. The housing stops, and we go into this situation of houses and trucks and dogs barking, and infrastructure is not there. Houses are painted on one side or the other. And it's very troubling, because you and I as Canadians for years have spent something in the order of $7 billion a year to the under the Indian Act, it was called, to be spread out and support and to retrain, retool, make sure they have that our First Nation Canadians have all the supports that they should have and the education they should have. But we're failing. It's just not happening. For some reason, the model we have, we need a new mental model of how to distribute this $7 billion a year, to develop capacity and self-sufficiency. And so why don't we look a little bit and become aware of the indigenous people, not just the First Nations, but the indigenous people in Canada's north. We have the same problem up there, where we just, when business interests want the riches in the north, they just come in and push aside and trample environmental concerns to develop the oil and all those things they want to do up north, without regard to the folks who have lived there for centuries. And so we have to be more sensitive to this and find the appropriate balance. We'll talk a few minutes about the appropriate balance between pipelines and things of that nature. But it's very much a timely issue. But again, it rolls back to our strategies, and it will impact on what we do. So we can talk a bit about the First Nations and the $7 billion a year, and how we might do it better. And do you have any new models that you might want to share with us? The IMF forecasts Canada as the leading G7 country, and of course we're not G7 anymore. I think we're either 9 or 10 based on our economy. Other nations have gone by us, such as China, etc. But in any event, we're still included, maybe an honorary title, in the G7 group of nations. But they say the IMF is estimating Canada's gross domestic product, that's all the values of goods and services from every Canadian for a particular year, put in a pile, what's it come up to, will increase by 3%. Well, that's interesting, 3%. And then they say the United States will come in at 2.2%. Keep in mind that we deal with, can't really call them developing countries, but nations like China, et cetera, for the longest while, they ran at least 8% GMP growth a year. And they needed that for the People's Liberation Army to make payments and do all the things they had to do. And they're coming down to about 5.6. India was picking back up under Modi and doing well too. But I was shocked here and here that they found in this report that the United States will come in at 2.2% growth from last year. I disagree with that, and certainly I accept that these folks have all the economic folks looking at it, but certainly we have to be aware of what Trump has done in the States, and depends which side of you're left or right, whether you're Plato or Aristotle and how you view the situation. But nevertheless, no matter how you slice it, since Trump got elected 9 months ago, the Dow Jones has gone from 17,000, give or take a bit, up to just below 23,000, which is almost $5 trillion in new growth, new value to a basket of Dow Jones stocks, up $5 trillion. And I would suspect by the end of the year, it'll break for an all-time high 23 as its system. Unless some black swan event, something drastic take place like war or an assassination or something of that nature, that Trump is removed, right now it seems like it can't go on forever. But it's supported by the idea, just the belief in business and the confidence level in the people in the States right now, given Trump and what he's promising, and the proposed tax, new resetting of the tax system down in the States of low as 15% tax, and small business coming down to 25% tax. All that stuff talks about increasing. And so I don't accept 2.2. I think we'll find, and the course will still be going on, so let's look at it in about 8 weeks. I think we'll see the next quarter come out close to 4% GMP for the States in this next quarter, based on the new tax regulations coming in, based on Trump, based on the belief of what they're doing, and based on the Dow Jones and the stock market. And people feel good if they go look at their pension plans, their 401ks or whatever they happen to be, and there's a basket of stocks in there. Well, they've gone up from 17 to 23, whatever percentage that works out to be, about 30-some-odd%. Their portfolio has lifted rather dramatically in 9 months. So they're feeling pretty good about it. But if some black swan takes place, we'll see that resettlement rather quickly come down. And why it's important, of course, is Canada's economic interdependence with the States, that most of what we ship goes to America, particularly from Ontario and Quebec into America. And any resetting in there, any setback in the American economic system through one of these sort of events would have dramatic impact on Canada, because we're tied at the hip. and we should be decoupling. We should be going as fast as we can to establish, and I think we are, new trade agreements left and right to include Britain and China and others. But anyway, the economic forecast there, let's have a look at that and see, but it's something to be watching. France, the new Prime Minister over there, he's got a completely nationwide strike going on. The tax in France at one point under the previous Prime Minister hit a high of almost 80%. Income tax, many people left. All the rich folks went off to Brussels and other places to live. The tax now is down to 62.7%. But that's still an awful lot of tax, 62.7% tax. In any event, they've got strikes going on because just what we talked about, this gap between rich and poor, the working class, the unions over there are finding that their spending power, their purchasing power is less than it was last year. And so they're taken to the streets. Not surprising, but it's something we're going to see a lot of because of this in Canada and the States and other places if we don't do something about it. So let's talk a little bit about France and the nationwide public sector strikes. Maybe that leads to the question, too, for us unions. Are unions necessary today, or have they gone too far? My dad, just after the war years, used to play in a band, piano, and they go do jobs at night in the 40s, and the deal would be they got 25 cents for the night to play piano for the evening, but if they didn't take enough dollars in at the gate, it wasn't uncommon for the owner of the place to say, we didn't take enough in, no pay. They played for nothing for the evening. And so it didn't take long for the musicians union to get a very strong and very powerful union built up because this was going on, and so they got a union they deserved, very militant, very strong, raised salaries. But today, is it still necessary? We could talk about unions, couldn't we? Employee discounts won't be taxed. There was some talk by the federal government, who are reaching every corner, to tax the employees' discounts. If you get a 10% off that sweater or something like that, they want to claw it back as income taxable. And there's some discussion about that, so they're looking at it as an issue. In fact, let me put the question to you for a moment. A little quiz. What's the biggest bite out of your paycheck each month? Most of you would probably say housing, but it's not. It's tax. The Canadian government, provincial, federal taxes, the GST taxes, all those additional little hidden taxes that we pay. The Fraser Institute does a publication every year, and again, biases. Understand, when I say Fraser Institute, we need to understand the biases they come from. They're from the right wing, Attila the Hun, less government. John Stuart Mills, well, he's libertarian, as I said. But David Ricardo, Adam Smith, those sort of folks, that sort of mindset, less government is good. Said we work almost to the end of June every year. 100% of the money we make goes to government. Wow. And you're allowed to keep the balance. So it's something we should look at. But anyways, a chance to claw back some more. And then there's hidden taxes, which is an irritant of mine, that in this province, ICBC, BC Ferries, BC Hydro, all set their fees in such a way they end up with $200, $300, $500 million left over in their system, and they give that to general revenues back to the government, and as a result, they're tight for money and have to raise again. So it's lots of hidden taxes in this story too. Some of the little points I just made notes of here I want to talk about briefly, and next week we're going to look at some tools which are interesting. I think one of the general themes in here we want to talk about is for those folks in Alberta and Saskatchewan, is the future of fossil fuels. And in this province we have Site C Dam, which is flooding fine farmland at a cost of in excess of $9 billion. That was being pushed strongly by the last Liberal Party, and now the NDP are looking hard at doing away with it at some cost, but nevertheless, personal opinion, I think is a good decision. But we also see pipelines. The one that went for the Eastern pipeline that goes through Montreal into the Maritimes at a desperate need for fuel. And so we have provinces like New Brunswick. Those of you from New Brunswick know the situation. It's almost like Detroit. Your population base is falling down, taxes are up high, and it's dying on its feet. It's a sad situation. They very much needed this new pipeline and the Canadian oil rather than buying the oil from offshore for their own system. But Quebec said, no, I don't think we want that mess going through our land, and said no. And so we have this difference in needs, and Trudeau, for whatever reason, being he's from Quebec, I guess is his power base, said no to New Brunswick and yes to Quebec. We'll cancel that pipeline. And I think the Keystone Pipeline is in some dispute, right? Trans-Canada Pipeline. Well, initially it made some sense, but with the price of oil holding at about $50, and I think marginally a little less than $50 for the near term, the economic viability of pipelines such as the Kinder Morgan, the Keystone, and the one out west, I'm not sure they make any sense anymore when we go away from fossil fuels, as the world is doing, and nations like Sweden and others are publishing dates that by a certain date, all the cars in those countries will be run by something different than oil and gas and diesel. And so the demand-supply curve is diminishing at the same time that there's a glut. America is refired up under Trump. It's fracking and oil supplies and going into protected areas before protected. And so there's lots of oil awash, and there's getting more oil awash. So the OECD, the OPEC countries, the nations there, which on the fringe includes Russia as well, who have in the past been able to control the demand-supply curve, are finding now they may not have the clout anymore to do it, as there's just too much oil in the system to make it happen. And so there's lots there to look at. So we could talk a bit about fossil fuels' role, price of oil, impact on Alberta, mortgages, those sort of things, and as a result of that. I think, and we'll talk more as this course goes on, the clash, Huntington talked about the clash of civilizations he foresaw back in 1994, and I think somewhere in your bonus section I put this article up for you to have a look at. He foresaw the idea of the clash between Muslims and Christians, and it's just like oil and water, because as long as you have a firm belief in the Quran and the values of the Quran, particularly their attitudes toward women, etc., if you follow those teachings, there's no way that you can integrate or be part of the Christian world. And he saw that clash. And so there has to be, one side or the other has to make some accommodations, and we see some accommodations being made in Germany and places like this, and in other places we see some hard lines being drawn that it's just not going to happen. So it's not that, but another clash is this clash of ideology between the nationalism and globalism. And that's unfolding before us, and over the next couple of weeks we'll talk about Spain and the troubles they're having, and the Kurds in Syria and Turkey and northern Iraq and things they're having. There's all sorts of balkanization taking place where nationalism is raising its head, and not nationalism in the sense that against free trade, but just nationalism in the sense that Canada first, America first, all things being equal, let's take care of ourselves first. And the globalists say, no, let's get rid of the barriers. Let's have a sort of one-size-fits-all world where we take care and we're all our brother's keepers. Again, Plato and Aristotle playing out. So let's talk a bit about that if we can. I went down to Key West with my wife, and there's a factory outlet down there for Coach purses. So needless to say that she got a few Coach purses at very good prices. And I noticed today in the story that I think political correctness drove it, that the company is no longer going to be called Coach, but it's going to be called Tapestry. And I think that's a result of this PC environment that they're on. But we talk a bit about that too. NAFTA's big going on this week. We have coming up, in fact, this week's unfolding, we have the fourth round of negotiations taking place between the three countries, the three amigos, and we have a very strong hard line being taken by America. They want to renegotiate on a number of issues. Dairy would be one that would concern us. The percentage of cars, they want at least 50% of all cars have to have American product in it. Agriculture on shipping agricultural goods at certain times a year. I think it's worth looking at that, because that's going to impact on all our businesses, the outcome of that, because collectively Canada has done well under NAFTA, Mexico has done extremely well under NAFTA, and America has done well under NAFTA too, notwithstanding what they're saying, that if you look at the actual balances, and I have the numbers here, but I won't bother with them for today, but I may post them in our discussions for us on what goes back and forth. But nevertheless, our friend to the south is very strong on America first, and he wants to restore the balance because in both countries, America is losing out a little bit on its goods and services. We do want to protect our water, which is interesting, and I didn't see that being discussed, but I'm sure America, California, a bunch are going to want our water. I want to make sure we get the barriers up there to protect it. So keep an eye out for that NAFTA. Let's see how it unfolds. I think that's for that paper. I may close there, but a couple of things I want just as I close up. There's Stratfor is a good, STRATFOR is a good subscription to have a look at. And they lay out the NAFTA in some detail today, and I enjoyed the read about that. And the other thing I enjoyed, and I didn't realize till I've had it for years, but talking about 18 months, is something called Foreign Affairs. And I read it from cover to cover. I couldn't understand why I'd read it from cover to cover, because of Business Week and other ones and Economist I read, and I really work at it. But the answer after 18 months hit me. The font's like size 14, size 16. So they knew the target market for old farts, and I can read it. But I encourage you to get a copy of Foreign Affairs just for your own reading, if you're interested in the water in the bathtub, because you need to understand those things. And so this particular issue had a great story on Iran, and with Khomeini's he's 77, much like yours truly. The runway is getting short for him, and he's purported to have cancer. And so the question is, who's going to run Iran? And he has established such a deep state down below, bureaucrats and hired people, that the sense is that even after he's gone, the bureaucracy and it's so ingrained in the system that will continue on that this stance that they have. And that's a challenge. In fact, to digress for a moment, Trump ran into the same thing in Washington. If you look at the stats, 94% of people in Washington, D.C. voted Democrat that day, 94%. So the people that work in Washington, the deep state in Washington, the bureaucracy in Washington, are Democrat. And so he's banging up into that wall these days, and that's the concern here. Both Iran and both Kim Jong-un in North Korea, the same sort of situation. There, that regime change in either one of those two countries could have a significant impact on how we play together and the water in the bathtub. I mean, Iran sits on the mouth of one of the choke points, the Gulf of Hormuz, where 1/3 of the world's oil comes through. And it's just a small little gap of space that could easily be choked off, and that would be quite disruptive to the world economy. And so it makes it an important thing is who's running Iran, who's going to be running North Korea, and we're watching for that, as well as what might break out from North Korea. So I'm not going to spend much more time on that. I just have a few closing remarks I want to make about the video I want you to look at. And watch this now. Thank you. This session is about a strategist's perspective, trying to get your mind right before we start strategy on how you're supposed to think. And this idea of the online booking, transforming the travel agency, impacts my mind, along with the idea of it says why banks feel very, very afraid. And here the banker's talking about the threat by I think it's Google and Facebook. Google and Apple are breathing down the banks, trying to start a whole new banking industry of online banking, and things like PayPal and Apple Pay, those sort of things are coming in. And this all speaks to something that we need to be aware of, and that's the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is this interconnectivity that we have on everything we do. There's over 50 billion sensors are going to be here within 4 years. 50 billion sensors. And we're all going to be linked. And I mean, I can just ramble for a few minutes. We're talking about, I read an article the other day of if you can picture a dish for solar power that's lasered down to the collectors on the Earth, that's 200 miles up over our heads. And I'm not talking a baby dish, I'm talking a dish the size of 5 or 6 football fields snapped together. This is significant size, but it's 24 hours a day shooting electricity at a good price down to Earth. That's going to be transformational on the fossil fuel industry. We need to look at that. We need to look at Google. Google are putting these electric cars together. They're almost out here now. They're just around the corner. They're not like 20 years out. They're getting ready to come to us, and certainly in 10 years, I suspect the Google car is something we're going to be much more familiar with. And we're not going to call it cars. To me, it's a mobile office that you're going to get in, give direction where you want to go, and then everything is there for you. You can do your office work in this little box that'll take you from point A to point B. And if you take the drones, we now control drones electronically, all the American drones and drones are a big issue. In fact, Amazon delivering things are now getting drones up to 400 feet off the ground coming in. It's not a quantum leap to see these automobiles, these mobile offices, actually elevated and going on channels to move from point A to point B. We talk about 3D printing of organs, which is coming, and they're underway now as we talk, growing ears and a little harder on kidneys, but they're doing kidneys and pancreases and things of this nature. The University of Alberta has started this sort of process of looking at this. The idea of a computer chip in your leg, your hand, whatever it happens to be. They're doing this now. People get released from Guantanamo, but they have a chip in their back that wherever these folks go in the world, they're being followed and monitored. We're not far away, and we can have this discussion about privacy and not wanting it, and I'm one of those that speak against it, but the reality is, folks, that we're getting everything. Samsung televisions, the new televisions, whether you like it or not, they have the ability to watch you and record what you're saying and do the analytics on that as to what you liked and what you didn't like. Cars at the present time, we have this star service that if you want to, something goes wrong in your car, you can immediately just start talking to somebody there, and equally, theoretically, they have the ability to shut down your car at any particular point they want to, and theoretically they can speed it up and put the brakes on. All this is just around the corner, and so are you ready for the Internet of Things, and how is it going to impact your daily life, and are you ready for it in your businesses, and more importantly, from a strategist perspective, how are you going to take advantage of that? Because the reality is, folks, let me even go further if I can for a few seconds on that. It's so important when you think of the Internet of Things. I want you to think for a minute that I'm seeing that we have the capitalist model, but the capitalist model is starting to get a hybrid or change because of the Internet of Things. I'm going to suggest to you that because of this collaborative commons that the Internet provides, that the old model of capitalism, that's this, if you can imagine, that this curve that comes down and slightly to the right, but the economies of scale kick in for the number of units you produce over time. The cost keeps coming down, the more efficient, the more learning, the more you produce, the cost comes down up to a point that you kind of bulk out and goes up. So, for example, if you had a hamburger facility, up to a certain point, you can produce hamburgers, and the price per hamburger comes down until like 10 buses roll up the front of your place, and that throws up your production operations management to such thing that the price then chuckles back up. But that's the traditional capitalist model, and we all strive to get down that learning curve, that economy of scale curve, efficiency curve as fast as we can. But under this new model, the Internet of Things is making it such that it's almost zero marginal-based economy. That this newspaper, it costs the money for this paper to be produced, and it comes down that curve just like I talked in the traditional model. But if you do this in line, the 7.2 billion people in the world today can read this paper. So it's zero marginal cost because it's a collaborative commons. And this goes on almost to everything, whether it be music, shows, education. I mean, you don't need this school to come into this place and sit in bricks and mortars. I mean, it's nice for the bonding aspect of it. But right now, Wharton has got these massive online courses. They've put almost 8 million people, and they're free. You can take a strategy course at Wharton tomorrow, sign up for it, and you can attend and get the same sort of instruction from a Wharton instructor, and doesn't charge you a penny. And that's all part of this new way we're doing it. I mean, do you have to come into this sort of environment, and or can you take little, like this course, can you take little parcels here and there and bits and pieces of it and take them at your time and your pleasure? And so this Internet of Things is changing the way we're going to think about things, this collaborative commons, we're sharing things more and more. And so the whole new business models are going to have to be redeveloped, this strategist perspective. We can't rely on the industrial age tools of traditional way of thinking. And I raised the point in here that if you look at the Pike's Fish Market little story, we end up with individuals there that how do you harness the energy of one person? And if you believe one person makes a difference to your bottom line, how do you measure that one person? It's not return on investment. It's not the traditional 5 categories of ratios that are in your little black book. But we've got to develop some new metrics to do all this. And so we'll talk some of this as we go through the course, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the Internet of Things on your daily lives and changes it makes, and a bit more discussion as to how big this is. Good. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. It's certainly a lot in there to think and reflect upon. I know it's going to impact every one of your businesses and your sectors. But that's it for today. We've covered a lot of materials in there for today. I hope you've enjoyed this. Call me anytime. I'm here for you, even including the weekends. See you next week. Bye-bye.